Oh, for the love.
Sorry, just clearing my Mountain Dew hole.
I got my phone hole cleaned today.
That's where you keep it?
You're so cerebral and you're so developed and evolved. From the middle after dark over here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for episode 61. This is From the Middle. I'm one of your hosts, Dylan, alongside Corey and Kendall, and our super sweet little entertainment, culture, and comedy podcast. Today, we have a friend of the show on. I'll let Kendall go ahead and introduce him, and we are very excited to be back.
Yeah, so my friend, Greg Lawrence. Say hi, Greg.
Hi, Greg.
He's clever, too. And I have, like Greg, I have a lot of old friends, people who I've known for a long time. And that's what I mean by old. Same age as me friends. And Greg is not only one of those, but he is king of one of those. I say that because we played baseball in late elementary school together, went into middle school and saw him. I'm like, hey, I played baseball with you. And so I had sort of a one small little few friends. And then there was Greg, who I was reunited with from my baseball days in middle school. And Greg was awesome and awesomer than they were. And that introduced me to a whole nother group of friends, people who I know and love dearly to this day. So Greg is awesome. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who have a similar story because he is that kind of guy, just includes people, likes people, has a wholesome way about looking at people and characterizing things, which is going to make him a great guest for what we're talking about today, along with his experience. And I named my first child after him. So
I really thought you were going to say, I'm sure everyone has a similar Greg.
That too. Everyone has a Greg.
I got a Greg. Episode 5.
So.
Thanks, Kendall. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So that's Greg. He's going to sit in for us on our fourth chair for our conversation. We're going to get into discussing art. Last week we talked about digital art and thinking a little critically, perhaps, of a couple methods of such. And we think that warrants a better conversation. And there's no one better to talk to than Greg about that topic that I know. And so here we go. But first, do we have any updates?
Can I share what I texted you both earlier?
Yes.
I was very excited. We've referenced the XFL multiple times on the podcast, and we are very sad to see the season and the whole organization end abruptly because of everything going on in the world. For the 2099 historians, that would be the 2020 COVID strain. I was very excited. So the news broke today that Dwayne, quote, The Rock Johnson, everyone just knows him as The Rock, right? His ex-wife, Danny Garcia, and a third person, an investor for Redbird Capital, Jerry Cardinale, I'm going to say it's probably how you say it, bought the XFL for $15 million. And that's super exciting when there's like very little to no sports on. Just purely the prospect of it coming back with how much we enjoyed it and enjoyed talking about it. I'm super excited. Greg, you're welcome to throw in your thoughts, but that was an update that I was excited about.
I mean, I feel like it's a really great thing. I mean, have you seen what The Rock did to the Jumanji franchise? I mean,
good point.
Something that was already good, infused with that many muscles, it's gotta be good, right?
Yeah. I totally agree. I don't think The Rock has done anything wrong since the Scorpion King. So, and that was like 20 years ago. And I think it's been all gold since then. So that sounds like sarcasm. I don't even mean it that way. I mean, that movie was not good, but like the part about him doing nothing wrong since then is the serious part. And I'm legitimately excited. Like there's a whole, how much industry knowledge and like connections that guy has to have for like the entertainment side of it. And then he also played football for the University of Miami. So it's like he also knows the sport. I'm super excited. Like I hope we're able to see that product come back for like spring of 2020 and get some off season for college and NFL, get some off season football in spring and early summer. I'd love it. I think there's absolutely a taste for football year round if the XFL can bring that back.
Yeah. And I think there's nobody better than The Rock to come in and clean up after Vince McMahon's failures. So just a classic Rock story there. Yeah, I think the XFL, we are perhaps one of few folks who were really into it. I mean, to the point I could see myself. I don't feel a need to switch over, but I feel like I could have, because it just their whole mantra was trying to just cater to what fans wanted, and they made no apologies about that. So they're like, yeah, sure, we're going to let you listen to what's going on through the headphones in the quarterback's helmet. We're going to let you listen to that. That's going to be on broadcast. You're going to listen to the coaches talk. You're going to listen to huddles. We're going to shorten the game. There's going to be a clock on the snap, and all kinds of fun things that I feel like we're really shaping up well. And I think with a good relationship in the NFL, with the NFL, could make the NFL better, because the NFL is so slow to change with things like that. And I think the XFL would make a good proving ground for rules changes and things of that nature. So I really hope to see this thing take off for a myriad of reasons. That being the top one is that there's Monday morning quarterbacks who want the NFL to do this, that, and the other thing so bad, and the discussion is always, well, that will never work. And then the XFL does it, and it appeared to be working. So I don't know. There's my thoughts on it. I'm excited. It's a good day.
My only thoughts are, since we're talking about art tonight, specifically digital art, let's not blame the Scorpion King on The Rock only. The visual effects artists have a little something to do with that. So much so that the Collider Crew, a YouTube channel that we've recommended before, reimagined those scenes where The Rock comes out as the Scorpion King and did much better VFX work on it. Anyway, a little shout out to the Collider Crew. But
and we'll do a fact check. I'll fact check you on that. Actually, I think that's even in reference to him as the villain in like the Mummy 3.
Correct. Yeah.
Where the Scorpion King movie, he wasn't the weird scorpion creature. Actually, that movie wasn't bad. So like I said the wrong movie, and then the Collider thing is actually about the Mummy 3, which that as the villain, him as the villain as a half creature was terrible. The Scorpion King movie was fine though. Which those happen to be totally unrelated, even though he was the same character with the same name. I don't know how those were like not tied together, but we didn't have cinematic universes back then, so here we are. But yeah, I was even feeling out the XFL for like favorite teams, like trying to figure out who I'd want to root for. The super optimistic fans are like, if this works, maybe it could be like the minor league, like in soccer, where they have like the tiers and teams can. I don't think it'll ever do that, but I do love the idea of some of the players that don't make the draft could go to the XFL.
Yeah.
Some of the XFL players actually were able to join NFL teams after the partial XFL season. I think there's just a lot that fans could get into, and there's a lot of good players that maybe just don't quite make the NFL that could really be awesome in the XFL.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's give JT Carrot a job.
I think that's one of the best things that could come out of that is more people like Kurt Warner that had to go to a different league to find himself, to understand who he was as a quarterback, to come into the NFL, to become an elite quarterback. I think that's going to happen much more often with a stable secondary football.
Yeah. So that's my update. That's the only one I got this week.
Very interesting update. Yes, that is something we've been following closely here on From the Middle. So thank you for sharing that. Kendall, since we're borrowing your Greg tonight, my Greg and I from episode 5 did something that I've always wanted to do. I have this fantasy of I would love to drive around 270, which is our Beltway loop here in Columbus. I've always wanted to drive around that as fast as I could in a car. Since that's not safe or legal, Greg and I, the other night on his Harleys, rode around 270 at night. And that is one of the funnest things I've ever done. Just hold the throttle at 70 miles an hour, and it takes about an hour to get around the whole Beltway, riding underneath the jets that were landing at Port Columbus, John Glenn International Airport. That was pretty cool. So had to share that. Shout out to my Greg. Thanks for letting me borrow your bike, buddy. That was really fun.
Top Gun theme song was playing in my head as you started were telling that story. Then you mentioned the airplanes, and
Exactly.
that was.
So that's one update. Also, I'm pretty sure I fractured my pinky toe. It's stubbed it real good, and it's all black and blue, and there's a sharp pain when I touch it. So that's fun. There's nothing.
Two questions. Are we going to get pictures on social media?
Do you want them?
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay.
And second, what'd you do?
So I was headed to the garage fridge to get some cold beverages.
You mean you didn't have your butler do it for you?
If you listened last week, you learned just how much I love having a cold beverage at the ready. And so I was going out to the garage fridge to grab one, and we have a small garage, and there's lots of kid stuff everywhere. And I just stubbed it on one of the pool supply boxes and did one of those, son of a, and
So it sounded like you were trying to blame the kids' toys, but it wasn't. It was your fault.
yeah, it totally was. And,
Yeah.
and there's nothing you can do for a broken toe other than maybe tape it to the one next to it, like a buddy splint.
Well, you could cuss at people,
Yeah.
or that makes it feel better.
So I'll send pictures if y'all really want to see them.
That'll be our first Patreon exclusive. You got to pay for that one.
So not much going on this week is what I'm saying.
Oh, beautiful.
Greg, what you got going on, buddy? Tell us about yourself. Let the people know who Greg is.
People know who Greg is. So I'm a teacher. So like my spring break is almost over. We obviously couldn't.
I just caught that, by the way.
We couldn't teach in person the last quarter, so I've been home. But one of the good things about it, I have a now 1-year-old, so I've got to spend the last 6 months, whatever it's been now, hanging out with her. It's been pretty great. Like, not that I would ever wish quarantine or pandemic on the world, but if it was going to happen, it's been a pretty great time for it. I've got to see all that stuff. So wrapping up the summer, not doing a whole lot, hanging out at home.
And what do you teach, Greg?
Yeah, so I teach digital art at a middle school just outside of Columbus, Ohio, to 7th and 8th graders that come into it wanting, hey, this is kind of like art, but it's also on a computer, and I like Minecraft, so let's do this thing. But I mean, I can go as deep as you want, but like I focus a lot on creativity and creative thought, a little bit of dramatic inquiry type stuff. We do the main program that we use is Photoshop, and then build from there. So that's what I do.
That's so cool. So for those of you who are hearing Greg and think he might sound familiar, or are seeing Greg and think he looks familiar, he was a guest on episode 50, where we brought in a bunch of our loyal listeners to celebrate our 50th episode. So this is actually the second time he's joining us. And then for some added context, so last week, just randomly, I asked the question, if you learned that an artist draws or paints over top of photos, would that cheapen the artwork for you? Not cheapen literally, but like, would it devalue the end product if you knew that that was a part of their process? And then on our group, our Facebook group, this actually sparked a really cool conversation where a lot of people weighed in and had lots of great questions about what is digital art exactly, and then what is digital painting, because I've seen a lot of digital painters who seemingly just paint right over top of a photo, and that doesn't seem like that's very authentic to present that as a painting. And then Greg kind of weighed in, and then it kind of became what is art. And so Kendall thought it would be really cool to bring Greg in to talk about any and all of those things. And when I heard that somebody was willing to come in and talk about art stuff, I was super excited. So we can go as deep into any of that as you want, Greg, but that is the context for the rest of you who are curious.
I think we gauge it on whether or not Kendall falls asleep. When he falls asleep, we'll take a detour on what we're talking about.
I've got a fridge full of Pepsi Max, or Pepsi Zero, as they call it now. So
I'm just glad we have a podcast we can jump from the XFL to art.
the XFL is art.
Yeah, beautiful. Kendall, you have a fridge full of Pepsi.
Yeah, that obviously wasn't important. What is important is, all right, so there's so I was going back, and when I was going through while I was editing last week's episode, there's not an episode that goes by where I don't have kick myself moments, where it's like, oh, I did not say what I actually think. I thought that maybe I did, but I didn't. But so not only did I have that error, but I also had the error of I took Corey's question literally. So when he was saying, does it cheapen the art for you? I'm like literally thinking, well, yeah, I would literally pay less for A than I would for B, but that depends on the thing. And then we started to get into what I thought was a conversation in the weeds of whether or not it's art. Which is in my mind was a totally different topic. So I'm editing this thing and I'm listening to myself talk and I'm like, man, this sounds like I hate artists, which would be silly, or that I hate musicians. And so part of what and so I've been thinking a lot about it over the week, like, okay, well, where do I stand on things like that? And that Facebook conversation helped me kind of put some thoughts into words using other people's words, which is good.
So you were copying?
So I was copying, but specifically Greg made the comment of art is if somebody, it depends on their motivation. If somebody went out to set art, then that's what they did. They created art. And so I thought about that, and at my core, I believe that. But I kind of want to, for just a moment, narrow in on that idea, Greg. If someone else is setting out to make it, like, what does that mean? Even setting out to make art, like, is it the eye of the artist as to whether or not they're making art, or what's going on there?
So, I mean, there's lots of really lazy answers, and that was kind of my lazy answer, but some of the lazy answers I really enjoy of like, what is art? And well, if someone says something is art, then it's art. I mean, that's a lazy answer, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, sure, I get it. But when you really look at what that might mean, because one of the first things that I do when I teach my middle schoolers is I have them answer the question, what is art? And they fall into a couple different categories. We have the category that's like art is color and painting and like a physical action of something that they have known. This is a medium that I've used before, so ceramics is art. Another category that I always get is the art is creativity and inspiration and emotion and like this meaning behind it. And then you also get the students who are just like, art is everything. And like literally that's everything. That's the one word that they put on there. And what we do when we go back and talk about those answers is we understand that none of those are wrong, right? Like art can be anything. And really the goal of the class is for you to come up with your own definition of art. I can give you my definition of art, but that doesn't matter. Like your definition of art will be definitely different than mine, no matter what, no matter who you are. It's that constant evolving of what is art to you that really matters. Because if you understand what art is to you, then you're going to appreciate it more. So to me, when I'd say, you know, if someone said, hey, this is art, then it becomes art. It's the understanding that not everything is art, but anything can be art. Example, one of the most important works of art of like the past probably 200 years is a work of art called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp, and I love it. It's terrible, and I show my students this work of art. It's called Fountain. It's a urinal put on its side. It crushed what everybody was thinking because it was put up in the World's Fair in the 19 teens. And here's this really like starting to be famous artist, and he's given us a urinal. Like, what do we do with that? But the fact that he called it Fountain, giving it a totally different meaning, you know, because like when you see it, okay, but then you've got the meaning that he adds to it. Then he's challenging what is art, and that's where that comes from, is him saying, you know, I'm an artist. I have created this thing that I have created because I have created it, because I am an artist, is art. So that intention behind it, that's for me, that's where things fall into play. Because way too often, especially in America, we're really big onto like, hey, it needs to look beautiful, and I need to be able to pay a ton of money for it, or else it doesn't mean anything. But so many people, like throughout this whole quarantine, I've seen so many people getting into all these really cool hobbies and artistic endeavors that mean a ton to them. And then people are coming in and being like, oh my goodness, you're really, really good at quilting. You could sell that. That person didn't start quilting because they wanted to sell stuff. They wanted to make something. Which one is more valuable? The one that we've sold or the one that we've created for ourselves? So there's a little kickoff to kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So there's just a devil's advocate question there. So somebody comes up to you with their piece of art, and they tell you that it's art, and you agree. So you say, yes, that is now art. And a third person comes up and looks at it and says, that's not art. Is there any kind of social thing? Like, is there any, I don't know. Do you see my question there? Like,
that's why everybody needs their own definition of art.
Right.
Because that, to that third person, it might not be art anymore, and that's okay.
Right.
And I'm allowing it to be art to me and not art to you.
Right.
That's okay.
But then they want to argue that point, because obviously they don't have that standard that you have, that you can't just say it's art.
Okay.
Right.
What are they?
So then are they wrong on that point? Are they wrong on that fundamental?
If they're telling me that not only is it not art, but I'm wrong because I think it's art, then I think they're wrong.
Right.
If they tell me that what they have said, okay, I don't think that is art. Sure, okay, that's fine. I mean, I can talk to you about why I think it's art, but I can't convince you because you have your own definition of art. There are very clear people, very smart people that I will hang out with that will say, if it's not painted and from the 1700s, it's not art. Now, I think they're wrong, but that's their definition of art. Okay. That sounds like a boring life to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. For the most part, there, it's just interesting that like there's still like even that answer like doesn't quelch the debate.
No,
for that reason. Yeah,
That's why it's still going on.
yeah.
I'll never forget freshman year philosophy when my professor, who I loved, said, "What is more real, this chair or your idea of a chair?" And we argued that for I don't know how many days. And that kind of is how this question feels to me as a guy who went to art school and has been doing art since I could hold a crayon. That question, for whatever reason, interests me less. Not that I'm not willing to have it, but I'm kind of like, yeah, like what was the heartbeat and intention behind it? If you wanted to make and create, cool. It's awesome art. I don't love that people like to play with that idea and be provocative. There's a piece called Comedian, which is a banana duct taped to a wall.
I love it.
And that just took the world by storm, and people were angry, and there was all this reaction, and he made it to make art. And whether you like that or not, it's art.
And he sold it for what, $125,000 or something?
Yeah. And Jackson Pollock would splash paint on a canvas, and he wasn't doing anything to represent form or shape or space. He just put paint on a canvas and was one of the most influential artists of the modern era. So I kind of like whatever you do, man, that makes you happy. And if you're having fun, you do you. That's why I tend to lean more towards the value questions, because those are interesting to me. Those are more interesting to me. And I don't know if there's a more subjective field. Like this is one of the most subjective spaces that I know of. And that's kind of what makes the conversation fun and interesting. So, which is what led to my question about copying, because as a purist, you know, who was trained in the fundamental skills of creating, painting and shading and drawing, and has been doing that forever, to watch someone trace feels like, not literally cheapens it, but feels like that kind of is a cheat or cheapens it somewhat. But if it's a part of your process that you're using to get to the end result faster or better, we could argue that too. So I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling now, but
No, I think that gets that kind of gets back to diving in a little bit deeper to a discussion that we had started to have a week ago, and we stopped having it because Corey was afraid that like nobody was interested. But I think people are way interested. I think that people want to know so much more about this stuff, and it's kind of a weird conversation, I think, for most people to listen to, which is why I think that we find it intriguing. So yeah. Okay, so I came across something I was watching yesterday. So I'm somewhat of a magic nerd. I watch Penn and Teller videos, any that I can find, and there's others as well. But Penn and Teller Fool Us, their TV show that they have. I came across Penn had said something along the lines of the difference between jugglers and magicians is that jugglers spend their whole life honing a skill so that they can show it off to the world, and magicians spend their whole life honing a skill that they hide from the rest of the world. And and he's saying this in a room with other magicians, and the thought there being, now Penn himself is also a juggler, but the thought there being, in my mind, the way I took it, was that magicians are still every bit as skilled, just in different ways, just possibly in ways that are less showy, and I wouldn't devalue either one of those two things, based on what I know about the I don't know what to call it, the execution would be the word. So when I think about that, and I was applying that at first to what I was thinking about music before, that there are people who spend hours and hours and hours, and instead of practicing sort of the technicalities of playing a guitar, they spend those same hours trying to figure out how a sound in their head can make its way onto a computer. And then if for a live performance, if they're into that, they find a way to display that, to play it. And then they'll use music or they'll use dances or whatever else. They'll use a hype voice or something to kind of go along with it. But that's kind of the magician way of going about things, right? Like you don't see the work that they're putting into it, versus a metal guitarist who's playing these super technical licks right in front of you and kind of showing off his skill that way. So I kind of thought about that, and then applying that to art. The thought that I was having throughout the week was that so you have a particular skill where if you were to take that you could free draw something, whether or not you have a reference that you're drawing from, if you're pulling it out of your mind or if you're looking at something. But if you have the ability to put that on paper, that's amazing. And to do so artistically with something more than just the skills and techniques that you have learned is even more amazing. On the flip side, somebody who, now I don't know if this is precisely what any of the artists that we've talked about in the digital world are doing, but I have a feeling that at least some of them are doing it this way. They see a photo, they see a picture of somebody, and they think to themselves, man, this is just an example, that photo could tell a much broader story, or perhaps a more specific story, if the color scheme was different. And I kind of want to see what that looks like. And they can go through this thought process of like, let's add a wrinkle to the face here, or let's add some shading here. Let's put a different color palette on it. And me being completely ignorant of whatever technical skill would come into play digitally to put that together is irrelevant, because in my mind then, like they put the creative work in their head, and they're trying to tell some kind of a story, and the fact that they're tracing it doesn't matter, especially if they're trying to communicate something. The fact that they're tracing it doesn't affect the artwork whatsoever. So I don't know. That was an epiphany moment I had, brought to you by Penn Jillette.
Well, and I think that what you're hitting on, Kendall, is there's different layers of value, right? Like we all have that thing in our house that is ugly as sin, but we will hold on to it forever because Meemaw made it, or that is a layer of value that no one else is going to be able to appreciate, not in the same way, at least. Then there's the other layer of value of, this took someone a long time. They spent a lot of time to create this thing. That's a layer of value. Someone else, though, might be like, yeah, okay, the biggest difference between, you and Michelangelo is practice. He was constantly doing the same things over and over and over again. Okay, you can do that. But especially in the digital world now, why would I invest all of my time in learning a skill that I can replicate with a photograph? Not that that skill is worthless. That skill is very useful in certain contexts. But if my idea is to tell this broader story, why wouldn't I make use of other pieces? I said something about Duchamp earlier. Duchamp did a thing where he took the Mona Lisa and drew a little mustache on her. You know, like, he could have done that in one of two ways. He could have completely repainted the Mona Lisa and then added the mustache, or found a photocopy of the Mona Lisa and added a mustache. Are they of different value? Yes. Is one higher than the other? It depends on why he did it. You know, like, the story told by spending all the time to completely recreate a Mona Lisa and then add a mustache is very different than someone who just took a picture of the Mona Lisa and added a mustache, right? Like, that story between those two pieces of art is vastly different. So which one's worth more? It depends on who's buying it and who's hearing the story.
Yeah. Such good conversation. Oh, I'm in some ways I'm triggered, and in other ways I'm inspired. So I'll try to go with a few different thoughts. So I posted a video on our page that I thought was a good start to the conversation. It's a video called "Is It Okay for an Artist to Trace?" and it references the very famous Barack Obama painting, digital artwork that came out when he was running for the presidency. And that was just traced over a photo of him that was not the property of the artist who did the tracing. And there was a big legal blah, blah, blah. So it uses that example. Many people still use that image. That image has been duplicated, and it has inspired many other pieces that use the same colors to do all kinds of different things. In that video, he talks about when you're playing billiards or pool, you use something called a bridge when you can't reach your pull cue to make the shot that you want to make. So you lay the cue into the bridge to extend your shot. And the reason you do that is because your arms aren't 12 feet long. Otherwise, you would just make the shot with your hands and the stick, right? And that's kind of how I view tracing. People will trace or take certain parts of their process and expedite it with photos or whatever, because they may lack the ability to even be able to render it freehand, what most would call freehand, right? So to me, it feels like that devalues the process for someone who was not told or trained, but that your goal was to be able to do that without using the bridge or the crutch or the medium of tracing, right? And so, Kendall, in your example about jugglers versus magicians, I would say that even in one camp or the other, even they have sort of internal rules or code that it's like, we just don't do that. Like for magicians, we would say, hey man, that's cool. Yeah, it's all about the trick and the illusion, but come on, don't. It feels
actually it's not quite that awesome. The more you learn about magicians and the way some of these things are done, a lot of them like do just outstanding pieces of skill. Some of them just like cleverly came up with a self-working way to do a trick that if you knew it, you could do it right now. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. The guy actually in that context was I can't remember his name. It's a weird name, but he was a card magician for the most part. And he did this trick where it was a pick a card trick. And then the way he revealed the card back to the person who picked the card was he did a what's called a waterfall, where you take the deck of cards up here and you waterfall them down into this hand. And there's a number of different ways to do the trick that he did. But so he's watering them down onto a table, and he reaches out and grabs one and shows it, and it's the card, right? There's apparently like a handful of ways that he could have done the trick. The way he did that trick was he practiced since he was 18 years old, and here he is 20 years later. The dude is able to actually count that waterfall dribble, is able to go in and actually grab the card. So for most magicians, like their practice and their skill, a lot of it was in their mind and trying to figure out how to do this trick. His trick kind of bridged that gap in that he actually did the trick. Like, he did not lie to you. He did what he said he was going to do. But so that was the context for that. But part of the point of what I think Penn was saying was that, look, you didn't even have to do it that way. You did, and we're impressed because you did. But you could have kept that a secret your whole life, because the fact is it would have been perfectly acceptable for you to do it in any one of the other ways. And it still would have been a perfectly good magic trick if you did so.
Yet you remember it, and it's more impressive because he had the skill to do it. Whereas if you're saying it makes no difference to you for a portrait of Clint Eastwood, if I completely just digitally painted over a photo, or if I did it freehand with acrylic paints on canvas.
I'm not saying it makes a difference, or I'm not debating whether, I'm not saying that there is no difference.
Great. So I'm saying you saved me a lot of time then.
Right.
So I don't have to practice grabbing that one card since I'm 8 years old. I can just trace everything, and people will view my art equally.
What's your goal?
And I think that's the thing, what Kendall just said. Like, look, what's the goal? If I'm telling people, if I'm lying to someone, that's an issue.
Or conveniently leaving that out.
But are you happy with the end product?
I couldn't be, but that's me.
How would you? But if you didn't know,
right?
Because I conveniently left it out.
Yeah.
And I'm playing devil's advocate here as well. Like, obviously, one takes way more skill, and that is a value call on that. And you talk about, what would you pay for something like this? I think that skill is something that should be, paid. Like, that's. But again, why would you, like? It's all about what you want and where you want that.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who would be okay with paying $10 for something that has been drawn over because they can get it in 20 minutes. Whereas, full acrylic on canvas, you're not getting that in 20 minutes. Sorry.
Right. Which goes back to what you were saying earlier, Greg, about value, right? Like, there's so many things, ugly things that are meaningful, or one of the things that always sort of makes me chuckle is those that think that the best art is the most photorealistic art.
Well, that's a middle school view of things.
What's that?
That's a middle school view of things. If most people that view it that way have not taken any art since middle school.
Yeah,
because
like
as middle schoolers, that's the thing that you're trying to do. You've seen this photorealistic, so you feel like you have to do that, and pushing past that is where you start realizing, well, it's not necessarily about, like, look at Picasso.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Picasso could do and did photorealistic ish, but it wasn't that wasn't what he was trying to show. That's not what he was trying to envelop. Cubism wasn't about that at all. So why would he do that? That doesn't represent what he wants to represent.
For me, every time I look at that, and there's so many of them on Instagram that do celebrity portraits, and they start and they show the video, so they're not tracing, but they start with a 2B pencil, and they just keep rendering and rendering and rendering until that portrait leaps off the page with 3-dimensional form that looks exactly like that celebrity, and I'm like, cool. For me, that's why I've always been drawn to caricature, because push it and mess with it, and what can you do with it, and imagine it differently and be extreme. Like I find it funny that people are like, that's good art because it looks like a photo. And I'm
Right.
like, okay,
Then just take a photo. If that's all you want, take a photo. That's boring to me.
same.
You know, like make something with that, create something with that.
Yeah. Sebastian Kruger is a famous portrait artist, and he did really extreme caricatures for a long time. He took Pete Townsend and did a portrait of Pete Townsend where he completely wrapped his nose like around the guy's head. But he understood the musculature of the human face such that he knew what else would have to change to make that physically possible, and would paint his portraits in that way. So they still feel incredibly believable, even though the proportions are exaggerated to these insane extremes, right? And to me, that's interesting because he understands the science and the musculature of and the anatomy of the human face, but he's doing it in such an extreme way. Oh, by the way, his painting techniques are flawless, and he's just a naturally good painter. And so that's always been more interesting to me than, wow, you made it look exactly like them. Cool.
Well, and I think that marries the idea in art education. There's a lot of different ways of going about it, where you talk about teachers who are so intent on technique, like technique. Everything has to be perfect. And it becomes very mimetic, where it's like, all right, here is the sun. Everybody draw a circle. Here is the landscape. So draw a line, and we're all gonna and you can end up with some very beautiful things, but they all look identical because it's that repetition of something. Not that that isn't needed, but if it never goes beyond that, it's no better than owning a camera.
Yeah.
Right? And taking the same picture that everyone's taking. Like, it makes me think of like when you go to all of those really big things in the world. Like, you go to the Eiffel Tower, you go to the Empire State Building, there is a shot where it's like, all right, everybody stand in that spot, because in that spot, you're going to get the cool view that everybody knows. Like, some of the most interesting pictures of those areas are the people that go around to the back, or that are, in line looking at the people, looking at the thing, or, seeing it from, because that's the real life, the understanding of there, not the picture perfect face on the postcard,
Yeah.
So you have that technique, but then you also have a bunch of people in art education that are doing things like big ideas, where it's like, all right, I don't care what you use to make this thing, but we are all going to be talking about identity, and I want you to explore that. Here are materials, and similar to what some of the stuff that I do is, because I want to give them material, but then it's also, okay, here's material, but then also here is some technique that we're going to talk about so you can use those materials. This person might be making something totally different than this person, but they're talking about the similar theme, that same big idea. Sometimes I go too far into the idea part of it and not enough into technique, and I know that's a flaw in my teaching, but to me, like, that idea, the value of art, the value of art education comes from creating someone that knows how to think differently. Someone that is a good problem solver, that comes from art. Someone that takes things and moves forward with them, critical thinking, like that's what you get out of art. But if all you're doing is drawing the same thing over and over again, like you said, like those drawings where it is, you watch the video and it's like, man, they're really good at drawing Robin Williams. Well, that's because they've been drawing Robin Williams in that exact same pose at least 20,000 times so that they can make this one YouTube video. That's no longer art.
Yeah. And back to the value thing, and when it comes to teaching, I would imagine maybe not as much with middle school, but certainly you've probably seen it come later. The question of value always relates to, will they be able to get a job doing this? Will my kid be able to get a job doing this? Because they're not going to pursue that silly thing unless they're able to get an actual job doing this. Otherwise, it's a worthless endeavor. And so, unfortunately, that's one of the values that gets placed on it is, can I monetize this in the modern context and in the business world? And if the answer is no, then great, you're going to be a fine artist and hope to have your stuff up at galleries and maybe sell them in the short north. Um, but unfortunately, that's one of the things is, can I make money doing it? Does it still have value? Can it still be beautiful? Can it still be deeply meaningful to the artist? Absolutely. But unfortunately, one of the things that many look at is, just like they look at, is it photorealistic, is can they make a living doing that?
Right. And that's like, luckily at middle school, the conversations are a little different.
Yeah.
When I talk to parents, because I can say yes, because the skills that they're learning in art class, no matter what it is that they're going to end up doing, you know, at middle school they have so many options. They're not narrowing it yet. You know, we can talk about how, like, a really good scientist knows a science book forwards and backwards. The best scientists are the ones thinking about things that no one has thought of before, and taking what they've learned and applying the critical thinking skills that are needed in an art class to those things. You know, so like for me, that's an easy conversation. Like, yes, they're going to monetize it. Depends on how they want to. You know, how many times have we heard from the creative types, the new business models that, you know, all we want are these kind of thinking skills. We can teach all the extra stuff once they get into our company. We just need them to think like us.
Yeah.
You know, and that's taking art.
Yeah.
Dylan, you're quiet over there.
Well,
And a quiet Dylan does not mean a thoughtless Dylan. I've learned that about you.
it usually does. Well, this is great because we talk about how, you know, that little platform, triangular platform, kind of goes back and forth depending on the subject matter. And right now, I think I represent the middle of, like, I wouldn't know where to start or how to create a thoughtful question on something that I have so little knowledge of. But that doesn't mean that I can't take bits away from what you're talking about. And actually, you kind of answered a question that I had, but I'll pose it to both of you anyways, because I think the answer just slapped me in the face. But my question wasn't exactly, it's part of the art subject as a whole, but it's not what you guys were specifically talking about. If I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption, if the act of creating art requires some level of creativity, art of any kind, so somebody has to at least have a spirit of, or be a creative type of person, even if they're not, even they could be type A, but they have a moment of inspiration or creativity where they want to do something, right? So let's make that assumption. And if there's so few barriers around what is art, why do so many people, when presented the opportunity to do something creative, push back and instantly say, oh, I can't draw. Oh, I can't paint. Oh, I'm not creative. Oh, I'm not. So what is that? Is it purely just, and the answer that might have slapped me across the face was, well, I don't get paid to do it, so I'm not that. But there's so few barriers around it. Why don't more people feel like they can do it? You know, there's a $10 app in the App Store called Procreate that gives you enough tools that anyone can start playing around and create something. You know, the barriers are very low, if existent at all, for people to be creative, if that's the assumption we're making, to be creative and to create art. So speak to that in any way that you want. And maybe my assumption is off, or maybe my assumption's right and the question is good.
Or you want me to?
Oh, go ahead. You raised your hand.
Half an hour. Like I'll talk the next half hour on this one. Corey, Dylan, it's a great question. So there are lots of theories as to why this happens, and I subscribe to the fact that we teach it out of you. Have you ever seen a 3 or 4-year-old who doesn't create? Whether that is, here is a thing, I'm just going to do something with it, I'm going to tell a story with it, I'm going to take this crayon and I'm just going to scribble, and you see those scribbles and you're like, oh man, I don't even know what that is. But they have stories behind them. They'll show you what this line is and what all, like, they can talk for hours on this because there was no barrier. That barrier is gone. It was never there. You know, we teach this, like, our students are afraid to fail. And art is one of those things that you erect those barriers yourself, and the people around you erect those as well, as to, it's not good enough. Look at theirs. Theirs is so much better than mine. Look at this. Like, how could I ever do that? Photorealism, I'll never be able to touch that. Why would I even start? You know, like, it's such an easy, you're right, like guaranteed everybody listening to this has some sort of writing utensil at their house right now. Like, you could go draw something, but you're not going to. And you know why your artwork looks like a middle schooler drew it? Because you didn't practice at all since you were in middle school. That was the last time you drew something. Can it get better? 1,000%. Anytime you want it to. You know, try those things. Go do this stuff. And if you can find a way to get past the, well, I'm never going to be able to sell this. Okay, did you enjoy it? Okay, then go do that thing. Like, how many people sing in the shower? Why aren't we instead, like, doodling in the bathroom? You know, like, that sounds terrible. Oh, never mind. Can you cut that out?
No, we don't edit the show. That's in there.
But you know, like why aren't we drawing? And it's the same idea, right? Like, singing in the shower, drawing in your notebook at work, you know, those are the things there. So we teach it out of them. We teach them that you have to get an A, and other things are more important. So
I saw a thing one time about, I'm even going to get like the actual test itself wrong because I don't even remember that much, but it was something like a guy took a shape and showed it to a bunch of adults and asked them, what could this be? And all of them were stumped, couldn't come up with a thing. And then showed it to a bunch of kids. All of the kids immediately, oh, that could be a fire truck with its ladder coming off. That could be there was just one right after another. Their brain was coming up with things that shape could be. And adults, no idea. Couldn't come up with a thing.
That reminds me of a fun challenge that I participate in on Instagram. The artist Beast Rec posts these random blobby shapes. And he puts it out to professional artists and non-professional artists and just say, make this shape anything you want. And hundreds of people submit what they turned that shape into. And almost never do you see one that is the same as somebody else's.
Yeah.
And I've done like a dozen of them or so now. It's called the Beast Shape Challenge. And they're so fun. But the only rule is you can't go outside of the blob. You have to keep it all confined inside the blob. And it's just so cool how different people see that. But Dylan, to answer your question, I would say that it's because there's jerks like me who still think that there's value in fundamental skills. And so, and I feel torn with that because I'm Greg. I'm like you. Like I think it was Picasso who said every child is an artist, right? And that dies somewhere along the line because someone tells them that that's not worthwhile. And that's sad. And so many people come up to me and say, I used to draw. I used to really love painting. I wish I would have never stopped or whatever. And I do think you can keep getting better. And I do think, but I still can't get over that piece of me that it's like tracing bothers me. That's it. That's all it is.
It almost feels like there's got to be like a baseline for this is at least what we expect most people to try to do. You know, we expect most NFL quarterbacks to meet this form factor, and we expect them to try to throw this kind of way. But every now and then you're going to get the Russell Wilson, or you're going to get somebody that you're like, all right, they just get away with it because they're good at the thing they've created that's a version of this.
But then you never get bananas taped to a wall.
Well, you do. You just maybe don't get as many. Like,
well,
maybe you're not arguing that they're not artists. Maybe you're just arguing here's a baseline for anyone that isn't already succeeding outside of the bounds of what's traditionally accepted as the baseline. So like, this is the baseline. If you're succeeding outside of that, awesome. But this is at least what you should work on if you're trying. I don't know. This is so outside of my realm of whatever.
I don't think there should be a baseline, because what is success? Like, to say that the success is, well, I've got to sell something. Okay, I guarantee most kids, you ask your parent, hey, will you buy this for $1? Like, that you might be able to, like, where is that line? What does success mean? You know, does it mean that you have to sell something? Because that's the very materialistic view of things. Like, is success, I created something. Well, then there's no bar, and there should not be a bar, right? Like, everybody should be creating something, and it doesn't matter what it is. It can be a podcast. Like, to say that you're not an artist, or you don't follow art, or what, like, now you're talking about fine art, because there's so many different types of art. Like, that's, a podcast can be your art, you know, dancing can be your art, singing can be your art. Like, it's that finding something to create and going out and creating it. And any barrier that you're putting in front of someone in front of that is a detriment to them.
Yeah, and I think for this conversation, we've probably most likely kept it to what's traditionally art, like painting, sketching, drawing, digital. Like, absolutely, music is art. I've seen people create things out of Lego that absolutely you would call art. Like, it's incredible. But I think for our purposes, we've kept it to what traditionally happens inside of a art classroom, right? Like, those types of fundamental things that kids learn and then do all kinds of cool stuff with that you would normally expect, you know? But I do think it's interesting. I mean, I think the discussion is interesting, and it's easy. I think I represent the narrow view in this case, where, you know, at least three of you, at least three of the people on this look at art as a lot of different things. And I think I probably represent the majority and go, yeah, it's like painting and drawing and iPad, Photoshop type stuff is all like art, and it's really cool. Not that a lot of people wouldn't think of music and other things the same way, but how we view traditional art is probably much more narrow. And so I think even having the discussion is great, because to somebody, you know, saying, like, using the example of, you probably won't go pick up a pencil, because that's the type of tool that they think of as a traditional artist would use. Where maybe somebody, you know, will listen to this and go, I'm going to go back to sewing my thing because I enjoy quilting and I enjoy whatever. Maybe that's your art, and that's awesome. You know, there's a lot of different things people can do.
When I think about it from a consumer perspective, and I'm not necessarily talking about materialism there. If sort of three people came up to me and one of them showed me something that was immaculate, that they created out of nothing, and it showed all kinds of technical skill, and it spoke to the years and years of hard work and honing of those skills, I would look at that and I would be excited for them and say, man, that's really cool. That's really impressive. Another person came up to me and had something that maybe was traced or something else, or there was something that one might consider a shortcut. But they explained sort of this thing that came out of them and told me a story about it. I would also think that that's cool. And so the first one, like, made me way impressed. The second one possibly made me cry. And then a third person comes up and says, hey, I'm working on some technical skills, and look, I drew this. I don't know how to make hands, so don't look at that part. But, you know, and it's rough. But they tried something, and maybe it was a mix of like emotion pouring out on paper. They wanted to do something. They knew they didn't have the skill set to pull it off, but they tried it anyway. I'd be proud of that person too. And all three of those are three different types of proud, 3 different types of sharing and excitement. If all 3 of them asked me whether or not I wanted to buy their thing, then looking at the materialistic thing, then that first person, if it's something that I felt like also spoke to me, then maybe I would pay a good chunk for that. The second person, I would say absolutely I want to, but I would have the tag along question of, but how much is it? So there'd be that. And the third person, I would probably say, well, keep trying. I don't know. But
Kendall, the third person is your daughter.
Oh, well then she became the second person.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, layers of value depending on how you view these things.
Yeah, and you've brought that up multiple times, Greg, and it's such a good point, because I think about it like, what are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to create? Do you want a medium to create? Awesome. And you got to think about my background too. Like, the school's job is to increase the placement of their graduates. And so they have a different bar and a different metric than just, we have a bunch of students who love creating. Well, they got to get people placed. And if you tell me your goal is to be a Society of Illustrators award-winning illustrator, there are some baselines, unfortunately, to that. There are some metrics. If you just want to create, sky's the limit. But Dylan, to your point earlier, it totally depends. If you tell me you want to be a New York Times best-selling children's book artist, well, that's a different path and that's a different set of skills. But this has been really fun. And Greg, appreciate you so much just sharing a little bit about your background and your story. And thank you for inspiring another generation of young artists. And hopefully I don't squash their dreams with words like skill or doing it freehand.
I think if anything that we've learned is that this is a good and worthwhile conversation to have. And I would hope that people feel encouraged by it across the board. That's my hope.
Any parting words, Greg?
Go make stuff.
Go make stuff.
Go make stuff. Go make stuff. Go change the world.
Thanks for listening to another episode of From the Middle. Have a great week.
Yeah.